Thanks to Pastor Joe, thanks to OAM. And when I say OAM, of course, I mean y'all in front of me and y'all out there in TV land, because there are groups ranging from North Dakota. There's OAM West, which is in Colorado, OAM West Bank, which is in the Pacific Northwest. I see a lot of brand new faces. You all probably have absolutely no idea what to expect with me. That's okay. Many times I speak and I have no idea what to expect either. So it's all going to go well. While I was here, this is actually, it's almost 3 times within 12 months that I've been here in DeRidder, the pleasure capital of Louisiana. I mentioned DeRidder, Louisiana. People say, where? It's DeRidder. Like, how can you not know? So there was last January. Israel had not reopened to tourism. For 2 years we were closed. People say, well, as a tour guide, Hanoch, what did you do during those 2 years? You couldn't work, you had no money. I read a lot of books, and I watched way too many YouTubes, to be totally frank with you. I got to come back again during the summer, and I had a really interesting experience. First of all, I'd like to dedicate my remarks today to Ricky for refuah shlema, complete recovery. I actually was really, really hoping he would be here, because as a starting off point, I wanted to reference a conversation that he and I had, which mirrored a conversation that I had in 2 other locations. So 3 times during my trip here in the summer, I had people express absolute astonishment that I have never mowed a lawn. I mean, truly gobsmacked astonishment. Ricky was the most articulate about it. But in 2 other locations, like, I can't believe you've never mowed a lawn. You growing up, you never mowed your lawn for your parents. Yo, listen up. I grew up in the Bronx in New York City. Probably one of the most inner city urban environments in the entire United States of America. My parents were too poor to afford anything, let alone a lawn. Okay? We lived in a 3rd floor walk-up in a building that my mother had grown up in. I could tell you about the subway system, and I could tell you about concrete. Now understand something. Growing up in the Bronx, we were aware that there were children growing up elsewhere in the United States where there were grass and trees, and they had pets, and there were children that lived on ranches that had horses. We were aware of it, even if we couldn't imagine it. Somehow in other parts of the United States, people seemed unaware that a large part of America is urban. That is our starting off point today. No, we're not going to be talking about lawns. But what I have always done, I was taller when I was here last. There's a function of aging that is bringing me closer to my center of gravity, which simultaneously is rapidly expanding. It used to be that when I would visit America, that I would go into a Buc-ee's, or even better, a Walmart, and I would say, wow, I look nothing like these people. And now I walk in and say, yo, I'm back. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but this is my starting off point, because that's what I find when I go around and talk to people about Israel. Now understand something. I have never, since 2013, this is my, do y'all remember? Is it 26th, 27th trip to America? Something like that. Speaking to groups that could be loosely defined as Messianic congregations or Hebrew roots, quote unquote. The problem is those terms mean everything across the possibility of the universe. I don't speak at the majority of those because the majority of Messianic Hebrew roots congregations are virulently, my English is really, in other words, they're really seriously Jew-hating anti-Semites. They are. So I'm going to congregations that have a heart for Jewish people, that have a love or acknowledgement or somewhat of an appreciation for Israel, loosely defined. But as I go around, I find that people actually know very little about the background and what actually is going on. And I can tell that by the questions that I get from people. Not just as I travel and speak, but I'm a licensed Israeli tour guide. That's what I do for a living. So I'm constantly educating or attempting to educate. Today's presentation, how did we get there? I don't just mean physically, how did the state of Israel come back into being yet again? But literally, how did we get to the situation that we're in now? Because your government, the American government, is losing its mind on a daily basis about everything that goes on in Israel and what's going on and why. So we're going to try to, I love history. Most people find learning history to be somewhat boring. To complicate it, you really need to look at maps. Now, map reading is a lost art in America. I remember being in the back of someone's truck as they're driving through Arkansas. By the way, Arkansas has an airport, the Bill and Hillary Clinton airport, which is like really freaky. And they asked me, they thought they passed their exit. So they asked me, Hanoch, were we supposed to have taken that exit? And I said, guys, I'm a tour guide in Israel. I didn't even know Arkansas actually existed. I thought it was just a name of a landmass. It is, actually. So, but they had me reach into the back pocket of the driver's seat and pull out all these maps, and AAA. I had never seen that, but actually I had seen it about 40 years ago. And strangely enough, I asked them, by the way, don't y'all have a GPS? At which point they both turned around from the front seats and looked at me and said, what? And let the government know where we are? So we're going to do some stuff about basics of Israel. And many of you probably already know that this is the time of year when people are beginning to sign up for the Connect to Israel experience. It's an amazing tour that Mike Clayton and I run. I'm going to tell you all about it in a little while. This congregation has had not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 people from this group come. Now, if we include OAM out there, West Bank, etc., that number is much greater. And I'm looking to see some of you in Israel this coming November. But first of all, how did we get there? Let's go to the first slide, please. Okay, this is a standard picture of Israel. Thank you, Kyle. It's such a joy for me to see such dear family again, and both Chill and Kyle. By the way, when you combine their names, that's the way it comes out. Yeah. We have Kyle and Chill together, so I'm very honored. Okay, standard picture of Israel. By the way, you'll notice the shading in the middle. That's the area of Judea and Samaria that your government refers to as, quote, the West Bank. We're going to be talking about that term, that terminology, what it means. But when I said before that America is losing their mind, the American government, however much mind they have, in a few weeks, Jake Sullivan is going to Israel for an official series of meetings. Y'all know who Jake Sullivan is? He's your national security advisor. Okay, we're not talking about the Knesset now. Anthony Blinken, America's Secretary of State. Yeah, he's coming to Israel too. Okay, y'all should keep him here, by the way. But okay, Israel. We are the size of the state of New Jersey, the modern state of Israel. But there's a whole history here. And why are we going into the history? We have to turn to the next slide. That's a map of Greater Israel, the biblically promised borders, the Nile to the Euphrates. Some of you will notice that includes what today is Jordan, most of what today is Saudi Arabia, half of Iraq, Syria. It puts us on the border with Iran. It's a much shorter distance to fly that way. Yeah, when our bombers have to go. Absolutely. The problem is most people in this movement, that's the map of Israel they think of. Because as Christians, you have been raised your entire life to think of nothing but your salvation and going to heaven. Having to live in this world as it is a huge challenge for you. The Jewish people come from a totally different perspective. Quoting the words of Tommy Waller, the visionary that created the Hayovel program that takes volunteers, Christians, and brings them to Shomron, Samaria, where they establish the vineyards and create the amazing wines that we all enjoy so much. Tommy said, quote, "The Jews do prophecy. We watch for it and wait for it to happen." And that was one of those moments, one of the few times on earth that I have ever experienced myself doing this with nothing else to say. So, oh, you thought you'd pull a fast one on me. Yeah, I haven't hung out with Kyle in a while, so I don't know. Okay. So, this map is important, but it's not what we should be focusing on. So let's go to the next one. Okay. I don't know. I apologize. It's what you really need to be noticing is in the middle of the country are mountains. And then on the other side where it's tan, that's currently called Jordan. Although y'all know that 2.5 tribes of Israel settled there. This is always part of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. What most of us know about geography in Israel has to do with those mountain ranges. In the ancient world, there were only 3 paths where you could go from Egypt or even Saudi Arabia and all the way on this map, it would be on the right corner where you would have Babylonia, Assyria, the rest of the world. Israel was smack in the middle. And history and most of the biblical narrative deals with those 3 paths that people would get by. One called Derech Hayam, the way of the sea. They would go by boat up the coast. They were not good navigators back then. So they couldn't go, let's say if they were going from Egypt to Rome, they still hugged the coast of Israel and went up. Then there's Derech ha'avot, the way of the patriarchs, the fathers, the center of the country. That's the biblical backbone of Israel. That's through Shomron, Samaria. Again, what the Americans call the West Bank. On the other side of the Jordan River, there's a mountain range called Derech HaMelech, the way of the king. Because what you don't see is, as you go further east in Jordan, it's all desert. So those are the three paths that people could go by. Totally irrelevant to us today in the modern world. So it's good that you knew that. It was helpful that you did. And that's to understand part of the biblical narrative. That's what brought the Romans to Israel. We talk about the kingdom of David and Shlomo, David and Solomon. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, that's a lot bigger than Israel of today. It goes all the way up to the northeast. Those are our glory days. Remember that song? Glory days. Yeah. So Bruce Springsteen? God, I'm getting old. Too old to rock and roll, too young to die. The Davidic kingdom, the kingdom of Shlomo, Solomon falling right afterwards. Those are the days. Total of 80 years. That's it. Because the kingdom of Israel split after the death of Shlomo, Solomon. Don't worry, as we go through this background in history, we're going to find all kinds of things that are going to bring us up to today. Next slide, please. That's the time of the Herodians. Notice I use the plural. King Herod, Herod the Great, ruled between 37 before the Common Era and 4 before the Common Era when he died. But things went on. In fact, much of the building of the Temple Mount around the temple was done by Herod's relatives. So you think of the Herodians as a family business. But what you see is the Negev, the bottom triangle of Israel, was not under their control. The narrative that most people believe is the temple was destroyed, as you know, in the year 70. It's common knowledge, common belief, that most of the Jewish people then go into exile for the next 2,000 years. Raise your hand if that's how you understand what happened. That's absolutely incorrect. Temple's destroyed in the year 70. The majority of the Jewish people are not taken off into exile. How do we know that for a fact? Because 62 years later, in the year 132, was the Bar Kokhba rebellion against Rome. Much larger revolt than the Great Revolt between the years 66 and 70. Next slide, please. All of those dots, I apologize, hard to see from where you're sitting, are major Jewish communities between the years 73 and 636 of the Common Era. In other words, the temple is destroyed. Much of Jerusalem and the area around it are desolate. The Jewish community moves north. How do we know that that actually happened? The codification of the Mishnah, the oral law. 200 to 300 years after the temple is destroyed. The Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. What happened in the year 636? Why is the date 636? Because that's when the rulership of the land of Israel changes dramatically. The Romans, remember, have been in Israel since 63 before the Common Era. In 322, and every Christian should know this date, Constantine accepts Christianity as the religion of the Roman Empire. The Romans now morph historically into what's called the Byzantine Christians. The Byzantines rule in Israel until 636, when they're defeated by Muslims coming from Saudi Arabia. That's important on several levels. Number one, Islam is only created in 622. Islam is only created in 622. 622, the Common Era. In other words, Islam has been around the world for approximately 1,400 years. That's it. Oh. This is kind of beard stroking. I'm going to be throwing out a lot of tidbits. Again, when I say to people, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, was not desolate. Jews were living there. They were thriving there. Weren't thriving so much under the Byzantine Christians because the heel of Christianity began to grind us down. But the Muslims come. Now that's important on a number of levels. Israel is then ruled from 636 until 1918 by different Muslim groups, all coming from other countries outside our country, who never established a Muslim kingdom in the land of Israel. There was never an independent Arab/Muslim state in Eretz Yisrael. We had the Umayyads, the Ayyubids, the Abbasids, the Fatimids, the Mamluks. I know this is all Greek to you. And the Ottomans. All foreign Muslim groups, whether they're coming from Damascus, whether they're coming from Cairo, whether they're coming from Baghdad, all foreign groups. That's the groundwork today when we hear about creating an independent country called Palestine. The term Palestine comes from the Romans. The Romans, in attempting to eradicate the idea of any Jewish presence whatsoever in the land of Israel, changes Judea, to Palestina, named after the Philistines, the arch enemy of the Jewish people. They changed the names of cities. Jerusalem becomes Aelia Capitolina. My favorite is the city of Shechem. Shechem, where Joseph is buried. This is the time of the year. Parshat Vayigash, Parshat Vayechi. This is the children of this is the whole thing. Yosef is buried in Shechem. Some of you are saying, what's that called today? Well, for us, it's called Shechem. The Romans renamed it Napulus for their city Naples. The Arabs, who were not native to our land, have a they can't pronounce the P. The P and the B are confused by them. So they couldn't call it Napulus. They began calling it Nablus. And to this day, the Arabs refer to it as Nablus. Now, if you're native to the land, if you're a Cajun, shouldn't you all be able to pronounce the names around here in Beauregard Parish? Yes. C'est bon. Yeah, absolutely. If you're here, okay. So the center of the country is north of Jerusalem in the Galil, in the Galilee, in the Golan. Next slide, please. Here is major Jewish cities in the land of Israel between 636 and 1880. Again, there were always Jews in Israel. Yes, the majority left in the 7th century after the Muslim conquest, but Jews remained in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. 4 holy cities. Jerusalem. One of you want to say Tel Aviv, but no. Tel Aviv has never been a holy city. Jerusalem. Hebron. Tiberia. Tiberias. And by the way, just, one thing is really interesting. When you travel around Messianic congregations, people have their own unique way of pronouncing Hebrew. No, I don't just mean correct, incorrect. I mean, as my father would have said, the accent on the wrong syllable. It's kind of like, we're going to the kotel to pray. No, we're going to the kotel. No, it doesn't have an accent mark. It's not French. There's no Cajun influence here in the pronunciation whatsoever. So yeah, it's kind of weird. So, and then Tzfat, Safed in English. Okay, those are the main. So they can see your line. Okay, so they can see it. Okay, oh, no. I apologize. It's not all about me. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Okay, next slide, please. Here, we've got Jews in Israel between 1880 and 1914. There is a very serious misunderstanding in the Hebrew roots Messianic world that the Shoah, the Holocaust, was necessary for the creation of the state of Israel. They see it as cause and effect. The Shoah happened, Jews who survived went to Israel, the state was rebuilt. Absolutely, totally, unequivocally incorrect on many levels. There were groups of Jews from the Arab-controlled countries, we call them Mizrahi Jews, Eastern Jews, and Jews from European communities that throughout history had been going on Aliyah, had been going to Israel. Israel, which was dirt poor, they still felt the command of the Torah to live in Israel. Now, that's what's referred to as, we have the first Aliyah, second Aliyah, groups that were coming way before the Shoah, way before the Holocaust, excuse me. And rather than that the state of Israel was created because of the Holocaust, let me throw out a different way of looking at it. The Holocaust occurred because there was no state of Israel. There was no place for Jews to go. And what's amazing is we're living at a time right now, here in the United States alone, where anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, has become totally, absolutely acceptable on all levels, and it's coming from all sources. Now, I know I don't have a filter. I never have. And I know when I'm traveling in America, the people that have invited me, I know that I could practically insult their mother as long as I say something nice about Donald Trump. Now, this is Donald Trump, who recently had Kanye West, who spews Jew hatred as he breathes, and a white supremacist, tell me how that dinner went, together. Trump, who recently came out and said that the Jews, he was referring to Jews in the Republican Party, but he didn't say Jews in the Republican, he said the Jews are disloyal, meaning disloyal to him, because he is the flag and the Constitution, after all. It is No longer news. I have my youngest daughter is living in New York currently, and she sent me a picture the other day, posters in the subway defaced with a swastika. That's not, I mean, that happened in the 70s when I was a kid. But it's now on a level of acceptability that's shocking. Now, here, all the time, you had, well, just recently, we had a change of government in Israel. November 1st was the elections. The government was just installed a week ago. There is widespread misunderstanding about the government. I did not vote for any of the parties that are in the coalition. I do not vote. I would not vote for someone who would be our prime minister, who is a megalomaniac, who is trying to change our judicial system so he doesn't have to be indicted and go to prison. You know, as the saying goes, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. We do not have a right-wing government. You hear all the time, Israel's an extreme right-wing government. The Likud, the largest party, is a centrist party. Netanyahu is not an ideological guy, not as much as you think he is. We have the ultra-Orthodox parties who are not at all right-wing and are just interested in what their constituencies can benefit from being in the government. I could go on, and maybe when we do questions and answers at the end, we could talk a little bit more about this. But the Americans keep pushing this idea of something called a two-state solution. They think somehow in our tiny little country, we're going to have both Israel and something called a Palestinian country in the same little land. It's not a two-state solution, it's a two-state delusion. That's right. But keep remembering, there has never been, and there never was planned by the world powers to have an independent Arab state. There's never been one. And we go to the time of the First World War, and that's when we look at the next slide. This is something called the Sykes-Pico Agreement in 1916. British officers, French officers met together because they saw that Germany and Turkey would be defeated, and they decided to carve up the blue area was going to be British influence, the red and pink area was going to be French influence. No independent countries. It was going to be divided up by the European powers. Of course, post-World War I, the world was very different than people realized. Next slide, please. Okay, the British. The British received a mandate to create a Jewish home in what was referred to geographically as Palestine. Prior to 1948, Palestinians were Jews. I know that sounds really bizarre. Palestine, there was no independent country of Palestine. The British mandate for Palestine, the blue and the pink. In 1922, the British Undersecretary by the name of Winston Churchill carved 2/3 of the Palestine mandate for the Jewish home and created the Kingdom of Jordan. They wanted to reward the Hashemites, an Arab group, for their participation along with the British in the First World War, and they carved off 2/3 of what was supposed to be the Jewish homeland. We jump ahead to the next slide. The UN Partition Plan. November 29th, 1947, the United Nations votes to partition the land of Israel into two states, Jewish state, Arab state. By the way, notice it was an Arab state. There were no Palestinian people yet. This is only 1947. We have to get much more modern than that. So, we've got the country divided up in a really strange way. The Arabs reject it. The Jews accept it. The War of Independence breaks out. We're immediately invaded by 7 Arab armies. Next slide. Okay. What a mess, huh? The armistice lines. The state of Israel is in the blue. 1 second. Now, that's the UN Partition Plan. That's the UN Partition Plan. Couldn't see from here. Next slide, please. Okay. Here it is. The fighting is over in 1949. Israel was too weak to be able to hold control of the old city of Jerusalem. The Jordanians, who had the Jordanian Arab Legion, which was armed and trained by the British Army, the best army in the Middle East, they take over the old city of Jerusalem and ethnically cleanse the Jewish quarter. They go through the Jewish quarter very systematically, blowing up every synagogue, every school, every building they could find, and there's not a Jewish person left in Jerusalem, the old city. They're either imprisoned or thrown out. Nobody talks about this. By the way, when you come to Israel, I'll be happy to show you all the buildings that are rebuilt, destroyed by the Jordanians. Okay, now, Jordan occupies all of Judea and Samaria, what's called now the West Bank. That's where the term comes from. You'll notice that's the eastern part of our country. And on a topographical map, you'd notice that those are hills. We call them mountains. America has mountains. Switzerland has mountains. We have hills. Those are our eastern hills. It's called the West Bank because Jordan, in occupying it between 1948 and 1967, does not make it part of Jordan because it's not. Does not give Jordanian citizenship to the Arabs living there. They call it the West Bank because Jordan is on the eastern bank of the Jordan. You just can't make this stuff up. Now, we hear about Arab refugees in the War of Independence. Yes, there absolutely were. Because the local Arab rulers said, leave your villages because we're coming in to wipe out the Jews. Then you come back and take their property as well. Well, guess what, Buckaroo Banzai? They lost. And they didn't get to come back. Ironically, the United Nations considers the only refugee group in the entire world that has never been resettled are the so-called Palestinians. Because it's not in their interests to, they want to appear as refugees. So your family could have moved to America. You could be a doctor and still be considered a Palestinian refugee receiving aid from the United Nations. It's bizarre. Next slide, please. Okay. All those dots in the middle and on the coast are Jewish communities destroyed in 1948. Nobody talks about them. Nobody talks about the Jewish communities in Gaza, the Jewish communities in Gush Etzion outside of Jerusalem. And now we jump ahead. Wait a second. Do we have to let the people online see it? Okay. Hi, people online. I miss you all. Okay, this is a great map. This is May 1967. Wait a second. You see? Wait a second. The Six-Day War was in June 1967. But you got to look at May 1967. The Sinai actually See, I wanted to limit this. I originally had about 52 maps. And I said, no, I got to be nice to them. No matter how entertaining I am, maps get to you after a while. I love this stuff, though. 1956, which was a very good vintage. Israel goes to war with Egypt and conquers the entire Sinai Peninsula. That whole big thing, the whole Sinai Desert. The American government pressures Israel. President Eisenhower threatens to cut off all Jewish philanthropical aid leaving the U.S. to go to. That was in an era when Jews in America used to contribute money to Israel. Yeah, it was 66 years ago, a long time ago. That ship done sailed a long time ago. Part of the issue was at the very bottom into the Red Sea. Our shipping was blockaded at the Straits of Tiran. President Eisenhower promised that the American government would break the blockade should this ever happen again. Well, it's now May 1967. The Sinai, which is demilitarized and has UN troops, Egypt orders them out, brings troops all the way up to our border. That's where you see those red lines going from Egypt to Israel. Syria does the same. They cut off our shipping at the Straits of Tiran. Israel goes to the American government and says, hey, y'all, you promised us. America says, really sorry, we're distracted about what's going on in Vietnam. You're on your own. War breaks out, June 5th, 1967. Israel, which was being strangled. Now, you have to understand, Israel at the time was a nation of only 3 million Jews. The United States government, bless their hearts, for 19 years had us under an arms embargo. Between 1948 and 1967, we couldn't buy a single American bullet, let alone a tank or a plane. We had French Mirage and Mystère fighters and elderly British Centurion tanks. We struck first and destroyed most of the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. It's amazing. Jordan, hearing disinformation from Egypt and Syria that they're defeating Israel, enters the war as well. Jordan loses big time. We liberate the old city of Jerusalem and all of Yehuda and Shomron, Judea and Samaria. Now understand, for the 19 years that Jordan occupied that, no one ever spoke about an independent Arab country. No one ever used the term Palestinian. Palestinian came in vogue in 1964 when Yasser Arafat created the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Next slide, please. That's what Israel looked like the second week of June, 1967. All of Judea, all of Samaria, all of Jerusalem, all of Sinai, all of Gaza, and the Golan Heights in the north with Syria. In the Jewish community, we use the phrase that Mashiach, the Messiah, was knocking at the door. This was the whole enchilada. This was everything. We were set. And then we messed up. Because there's a concept that people misunderstand called land for peace. Israel will give up land and you'll give us peace. Think back to high school. There's a bully and he's going to punch your face in. And you think that you're going to get away with it by giving him your lunch money every day. We took the land that Hashem, that God had returned to us, and dealt it for a bowl of lentils. It weighs on me very heavily to talk about this. Egypt negotiates we could go into the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Egypt negotiates and gets the entire Sinai. But let's go to the next slide. And this is what we've got today. 1993, the Oslo Accords are signed. Now, have you ever been in a conversation with people, perhaps in a business deal, and you're both saying that you agree, but you have one understanding and you have a totally different understanding of the same thing? The understanding that most of the world walked away with was that Israel was going to allow for the creation of something called a Palestinian state. Now, those dark areas that you see in brown are what's called Area A. We have areas A, B, and C. A, totally under the control of something called the Palestinian Authority. This is an organization, not a government, because there's no country, but an organization that's going to set this up, create the foundations of a state, supposedly. The president of the Palestinian Authority is a guy by the name of Mahmoud Abbas, who was elected to his 4-year term as president 17 years ago. He's not leaving. The good news is he's 88 years old, not going to live forever. The bad news is they have no one waiting in the wings. In other words, the idea that there'll be a peaceful settlement is something that we Israelis seem to keep in the back of our heads. You know, it's like being in a really bad relationship when you realize that person doesn't love you anymore, but you're still under the illusion that, you know, you're a couple. It don't work. So Area A, total control of the Palestinian Authority, and supposedly security control of the Palestinian Authority security forces. Those were armed and trained by the United States government. By the way, you'll note that Israel now operates whenever we need to in that area. They're not a reliable partner in anything. Area B, supposedly civil control of the Palestinian Authority, security control by Israel. Area C, total Israeli control. But how are you going to cobble together a state like that? Next picture is even better. If you think of a patchwork quilt superimposed with Swiss cheese on top, that's what Judean Samaria look like today. It is a security nightmare. Now you'll notice that's labeled Palestine. I'm not responsible for I didn't have either the time or the money to pay a graphic artist to create my own maps, so I went and took what was, so yeah, that's supposed to be Palestine. Now understand something. Judean Samaria, Yehuda v'Shamron, Labriut, God bless you, is where 95% of the stories of the Bible outside of Jerusalem occurred. Right now, everything we're reading. Yosef, I'm looking for my brothers. Where are they at? That's where he was. He wasn't in Tel Aviv at the beach, sipping a pina colada. Okay. So not only have we created the fallacy and expectation of the world we've deluded ourselves. Shimon Peres, who used to be the prime minister and then later on president, used to use the term the New Middle East. I can tell you something. I grew up in the Bronx. Yo, now you can't leave. We actually used to speak like that. In an Irish Catholic neighborhood. I knew what it was like to be hated and despised by every single person I would walk past in the street. You do not change their attitude by donating money to their local parish so they can have, a nicer building. You can't buy love and affection. You can't buy respect. The only thing in the Middle East that's respected is strength. The only thing. Next slide, please. Oh, size and dimensions. Yeah. I don't know if you can notice that, but from Shomron, from Samaria to the sea is 9 miles. 9 miles. We're tiny. And the expectation, though, of the American government, the European Union, the United Nations, is that somehow we're going to surrender this. We're going to allow the Zyklon B gas to be loaded in the gas chambers again, and we're going to walk in. Next slide, please. Do you know what that is? Can't see it from where you're sitting, can you? That's the Trump plan. Remember the deal of the century? Trump had this idea that a Palestinian state, okay, you can't, maybe it's Jared Kushner, someone else, but that's the Trump plan. The blue area, including Gaza, including areas in our Negev on the Egyptian border, were going to be a Palestinian state. Because Trump was under the impression that the entire world can be bought. Everybody's got a price. You don't want to sell your house? All that means is I'm not offering the right amount yet. So we have a situation where there are Arabs who refer to themselves as Palestinians who are expecting to get a state in Israel. The only way there will be peace in Israel is when we can disabuse them of that notion that they will beat us. Now, in sharing information like this, the difficulty that I have is that Israel remains a mystery to most of the people that I speak to when I travel around. And again, remember, it's the congregations that welcome me. Israel is still a mystery. Not for the people that come to listen, but for the people associated with the congregation that choose not to come the day that I'm here. And some do that. You'd be surprised. I'm not surprised anymore. Somehow, to be Messianic, Torah observant enables you not to have any interest, concern whatsoever about Israel and the Jewish people. How is that possible? I mean, is it classic Christian replacement theology that all of a sudden y'all can inherit the Torah as you perceive it and exclude us? I really should start wearing a bonnet, so at those times that my head feels like it's going to explode. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so that's Israel of today. And again, that shaded area, and I hate it on those maps, Judea and Samaria. But people say, Hanoch, and by the way, I actually field tested this presentation on a number of people. They didn't like it either. Go to the next slide, please. They said, Hanoch, why don't you just focus on that? And that's Messianic dream world. That's really like, we don't have to worry about any of this stuff. It's not unusual. For instance, I have a whole different presentation on the Har HaBayit, on the Temple Mount, that I prepared for this trip also. And people say, well, why doesn't Israel just go up to the Temple Mount, reclaim it all, push all the Arabs out, and rebuild the temple? So that's not really requiring a very thoughtful answer, a question like that. I said, well, I can off the top of my head give you 1 billion reasons why we don't do that. And each and every one is a Muslim that would go to war with us. So I actually had someone look at me and say, yeah, well, bring it on. Well, it's really great and reassuring for us that y'all are sitting off there somewhere in North America saying, yeah, bring it on. I didn't see you running to Israel in May of 2021 when in 11 days we were hit by 4,500 rockets and missiles. I know that you've had instances of tornadoes and hurricanes and all that stuff. Okay? But you know what it's like being woken up in the middle of the night when the siren goes off because the missiles are on the way? And I at least live in a building that has a secure room, the reinforced concrete. My daughter in Jerusalem has to run downstairs with the other tenants of her building. That's okay. Yeah, bring it on. No, we need to have more of a grounding in what's going on in Israel. So when one of the talking head idiots, whether it's Blinken or Jake Sullivan, learn the name, or even, what's his name that sits in the Oval Office? Biden, yeah. Someone should remind him of his name too. It's funny, people used to laugh at our government in Israel. The fact that I've been an Israeli for 13 years and we've already had 8 national elections in that time. Y'all, parliamentary democracy, y'all are crazy. Then you guys wind up with a choice between Trump and Biden. Whoever's counting the votes or not counting the votes. And what happened to Kamala Harris, by the way? Yeah. People ask me, so what can we do? Because again, the focus is on Greater Israel. What can we do for Greater Israel? Support Jewish communities in Judean Samaria. I'm going to be sharing some information with Pastor Joe. A good one would be Itamar, for instance, where we all, Heather, Joe, and I, we all have relationships there. And you need to educate yourselves. I'll be happy to send you lists of websites, books to read. But if we allow ourselves to remain sheltered, and again, just wishing for that, the Mount of Olives splitting, the Messiah walking down. Well, we've got to make that happen. By the way, the Jewish understanding of that verse leads us more to say, okay, do you know what? Let's get a couple of shovels and start digging, to split that mountain. That's how we handle it. And it's great that people have a community like OAM, whether virtually or whether actually physically here, where you can be with like-minded individuals. And you can work together for this understanding. Which leads me into what I want to conclude with. Y'all need to come to Israel. And not for me. For you. You need to come to Israel to understand the scriptures that guide your life. You cannot remain a spectator in a generation like this. You have to see it and experience it and form those relationships yourself. Connect to Israel 2023. November 5th through the 17th. Astoundingly, while everything is going up in price, and by the way, in New York City, we never had Walmart. We don't have it in Israel. And I've loved shopping at Walmart when I'm here in America because of the prices. I went to Walmart yesterday. It ain't so cheap anymore. But somehow the Connect to Israel tour is the same price as it was last year, $2,550. Plus airfare, of course. Because you'll find, as I found, flapping your wings across the Atlantic get really, really tired. You need to plan to come to Israel. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And right now, people sitting here are probably saying, I don't have that kind of money. I can't go to Israel this year. I can understand and accept that. The one thing that I cannot understand and will not accept is for there to be a single person here to tell me that they don't have an Israel fund. I don't care if it means that you put in $1 a day and that you're waiting, for your IRS refund. If you do not plan, and by the way, please do not come over to me later and tell me when the Lord makes a way. Okay? The Lord has made a way. He has enabled each and every one of us to be alive and here today. Don't wait, I grew up in the era of, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? Okay? The Lord ain't going to buy you a Mercedes Benz. Back in that era, he wouldn't have even bought you a Chevy Chevelle or whatever that was. I mean, really. You have to do it. Man, I know people go to restaurants. I meet people as I travel around the country who go on vacation all the time. They're in their 7th and 8th decade of life and told me, I've always wanted to go to Israel. Have you ever been on vacation? Yeah, we just went on a cruise around Alaska. We went down to the Sea of the Galapagos, whatever. We hiked in Vietnam. That's a thing now, hiking in Vietnam. I almost got to do that for free. I mean, really. Don't call yourself Torah observant if Israel isn't at the forefront of your thought, your consciousness, and your heart. Man, look at the pictures on the wall here. The outlook of OAM is very clear. And you've got Hashem sitting there saying, is you is or is you ain't my constituency.